Hello and welcome back to my series going over the fights from Record of Ragnarok. In the last video, I went over the first half of the Jack vs. Heracles fight, and I, of course, only went over the first half because it is the longest fight so far. It took 50 minutes to get halfway through it, so instead of making a 2-hour video, I decided to split it into 2 parts, which is why we're here now. So in the first part, I said that I was going to go up to chapter 29, but I decided to change that, and I'm going to go through chapter 30 because I think the stuff that happens throughout that chapter is kind of important. It sort of serves as an epilogue to the fight in the way that the other Aftermath chapters didn't. But anyway, let's continue on with the fight. So when we last left off, Jack had used the face of Big Ben to cut off Heracles' left arm, which was something that has shocked the audience because this shouldn't be possible due to Jack's Voland being the divine weapon creating pouch. So since the clock face is not a divine weapon, it should have been completely impossible for this to happen. But anyway, the whole crowd is shocked. Heracles' friend Castor from Greece is freaking out, though Heracles seems to be pretty calm. He's taking this much better than we originally expected. But since this has happened, the 7th labor has been deactivated, and unfortunately we never see what it does, which is one of my personal biggest disappointments in the fight, is that we never really got to see what all the labors can do. We only got to see a few of them. So Jack kind of cock-blocked us on that one, but what are you going to do? Now all of Heracles' child fans in the audience are crying and freaking out, as I expected when I saw that there would be a big audience of children for this vicious street fight with a serial killer. But everyone, as I already said, is super surprised by this. Like the first 10 pages of the chapter, just everyone being freaked out by this. But the first person to figure out what was going on was actually Heracles, which is an impressive feat considering how naive and thick-skulled he's been. But he notices that Jack's real Voland is his gloves. So he lied again. Isn't that wonderful? Yes, Jack has been playing 500 IQ games this whole time. As I said in the last video, it's always a very clever move when the anime villain decides not to tell the protagonist what their power is, because that makes it way easier to fight them and also gives them sort of a strategic advantage. So Jack doing it twice is even better. But now that this has been revealed, Loki, being the sort of big brain boy on the god side, realizes what had been going on the whole time, and he explains that Jack lied about the bag being his Voland, when in reality it was his gloves. So what he did was he used scissors at first and tried to trick Heracles into thinking that that was the Voland, and even used the sort of knife trap at first to not make him even think about the throwing knives. And then after he used the throwing knives from the bag, he gave some ground rules about how he couldn't make anything bigger than the bag itself to really drive in the belief that this was his Voland and it had actual restrictions to it. And he did this over and over again to really drive home the idea that this was in fact his Voland, and so that he would never suspect anything out of the blue like the throwing of the clock face. And all of that, everything that he's done in the fight so far, has been for the sake of him being able to cut off Heracles' arm, which Loki remarks is very impressive, and Ares gets pissed off about because Heracles is his friend, and the gods getting tricked like this by a human really sucks. And after that, Loki wonders if this was Brunhild's plan, and she's like, yeah. And this is where we go into a little flashback to meet Jack's Valkyrie, Clock, who is supposed to be the 7th Valkyrie sister, which is an issue because Regan Leaf was supposed to be the 7th sister, so I think the author may be forgetting things. But whatever. Clock doesn't want to be Jack's Voland, And Brynhild's like, no, you're going to do it anyway, which causes Locke to resist even more. So then Jack shows up and is like, hey, are you going to partner with me? And she's like, nah, you suck. And then he starts fucking strangling her. And when Locke begs Brynhild for help, Brynhild just kind of stands by there and does nothing, which is really awful. And upon realizing that Brynhild is not going to help her at all, she becomes Jack's Voland. So, originally when these chapters came out, people weren't really sure why this happened, like, can you force someone to become a Voland? And then, after like a couple weeks, everyone put their collective brain cell together and realized, wait a second, the Voland process has to do with them being on like the same wavelength or whatever. It seems to require that they have the same feelings or motivations or something. So what Brynhild had done by not helping Locke when she was begging for help from Jack was they had essentially replicated the betrayal that Jack had felt when he found out that his mother didn't really love him. So yeah, they don't even tell you this. It's just something you have to figure out for your own. So anyone that says this series has bad writing is a fucking moron. But anyway, this is the explanation of how Jack got his Voland. And of course, Geir is very upset by this because Brynhild basically forced their sister to become a weapon without her consent, which is really awful. But yeah, so Jack's true Voland is these gloves which allow him to turn anything he touches into Voland, which is busted. But very situational, because if he weren't in this environment, which he specifically requested, then he'd basically be kind of fucked. He wouldn't really have anything to do going against Heracles, which is, of course, why he requested it in the first place. But Jack does a little demonstration with a pebble. He uses it to blow a giant crater in the knocked-over Big Ben. And at this point, Ares and the... I think Heimdall realizes it because he says it, is that everything that Jack touches, the entire city of London, has become a lethal weapon. And you sort of get these panels showing off all of the stuff in the city that Jack could touch to turn into a weapon. You've got, like, fence posts, fucking tombstones, garbage, anything he touches, he can use as a weapon, which gives him this sort of versatility that was not available to the other human fighters, which is also going to make this fight much more interesting, because it gives a sort of unpredictability that you don't really have with all of the other fighters, where they have a set weapon and a certain fighting style that goes along with it. But now that that's been explained, everyone in the audience, or all of the gods in the audience, and then Heracles' friends, are all very upset because Heracles is in a really bad situation. Yes, something that I did not go over in the last video, which is something that I quite like about this fight, is that unlike all of the other battles, except maybe a bit with Adam versus Zeus, is that at no point through like the entire first half of the fight or more does Heracles feel like he even has a shot. At no point does the god feel like he has a chance of beating the human for like the first half-ish of the fight, which is a nice change of pace. It's very interesting to see that the underdog this time around is actually the gods who humanity was supposed to be having such a hard time fighting against. It's a very interesting choice. But we get more shots of the city of London, Heracles and Jack having a standoff, and Jack makes a comment about how he hears how everyone is basically assuming that Heracles is going to die. And he says that we're going to enter the final act now, the final act of Jack's little Shakespearean play here. More reiteration of his ability. Ares starts to freak out, and then Zeus shows back up and punches him in the fucking face, which is great. So Zeus is back. I like Zeus. I think he's a fun guy, even though he killed Adam. It's whatever. He's a fun character. But anyway, he's back now, and he tells Ares to quit being a whiny little bitch, because Heracles is awesome, and he shouldn't lose hope in him. So, just showing back up is a great sign, because it means that the winners of the rounds could show up to commentate again in the rounds that come after theirs, which is great, because Kojiro, as I mentioned before in my video for round 3, Kojiro is great. I love Kojiro, so really hoping that he comes back. I think he'll probably come back in this round, in round 5, due to who the fighter for that round is. But anyways, Zeus gives a little speech after punching Ares in the face, which reaffirms his confidence in Heracles. And with that, we go back to the two combatants, where we see Heracles is tearing off the leather armor that he has and is using it to wrap around the stump of his left arm to stop the bleeding, which I guess means that gods can bleed to death. And just interesting. But Heracles is pretty much unfazed by this whole thing. When the fight was still going on, when we were following the chapters with monthly releases, a lot of us assumed that, at least at the beginning, and then certainly after he got his arm cut off, that Heracles would end up being afraid of Jack. But that has not happened. He is pretty much unfazed, which impresses Jack. He uses his eye to look at Heracles' emotions, and he doesn't see a speck of fear. He's very impressed by this. And after making a comment, Heracles realizes that Jack can see his emotions with the eye, which was something that I thought he explained to him pretty obviously earlier on in the fight, but whatever. But Jack goes on a spiel about how, with his eye, he can see emotions, and he can create beautiful works of art by killing people and sort of drowning them in the color of fear. But everyone is really disturbed by this, including the human side. The humans think he's evil, the gods think he's disgusting, and it reaffirms their belief that the humans need to be exterminated, which makes it seem like a bit of an issue that if the horrible evil murderer wins his round, that's a really bad sign for humanity. But after going on his little spiel about how much he loves killing people and seeing them being afraid, Heracles is like, "Oh, I see. You've lost, haven't you?" And Jack's like, "What? What are you talking about? I don't know. I don't understand what you're saying." And Heracles starts asking him, "Oh, did you become evil because of poverty or because of the deep cuts of betrayal?" Which is exactly what happened to Jack. He was a poor son of a hooker, and his mom never really loved him. So Heracles is kind of reading him like an open book here. But he's like, "No, that stuff doesn't matter. You lost to despair and gave in to hedonism." And as Heracles is doing this speech, Jack's looking at him, and his expression starts to change, and he's very surprised by the color that he's seeing. This new color is spreading out from the inside of Heracles, from his heart, and it's overwhelming all of the other emotions that he saw within him, and he realizes that this is a color he's seen before. But Heracles goes on, and he says that since he's a demigod, he's been a human and a god, and having experienced both of those lives, he can say with certainty that humanity is foolish. And then he goes on to list basically every single flaw known to humanity. It's a 2-page spread of him listing all of the vices of mankind. They're scornful, depraved, faithless, sycophantic, treacherous, lustful, rebellious, slothful, vindictive, envious, prideful, resentful, hostile, desperate, egotistical, unjust, greedy, sly, crafty, despairing. Pretty much any terrible trait of humans that you could think of. Heracles lists them off here. And after listing off all of these horrible traits of humanity, he says, in spite of all that, I truly love humanity. Now, this is why I like Heracles a lot. So when he was first introduced as the envoy of justice and his whole thing about how I'll always be on the side of justice, I was worried that he was going to be this sort of ooga booga justice good caveman, and that upon realizing that humans like Jack are bad, he wouldn't like humans anymore, which was something that I wouldn't have really liked that much. But this is much better. The fact that Heracles recognizes the flaws of humanity, but still wants to save us, makes him much more interesting, I guess. I don't know really how to describe it fluently. I also like the fact that he recognizes that evil people are usually the product of unfortunate circumstances, which also makes him a little more, I guess, three-dimensional. Gives him a lot more depth than someone who's just like, I am for good things and against bad things. But after giving this wonderful Adam-esque speech, the humans are kind of crying because they realize that they realize Heracles is a good guy that really cares about them. And the gods are, for the most part, inspired by this, which is interesting because they're doing this whole tournament to wipe out the humans. But Jack is also shocked because when he looks at Heracles, he sees the color of his mother. He sees the colors of true love in Heracles. And he has this wonderful panel of Heracles glowing with the image of Jack's mother sort of above him, sort of that angelic figure that she was when Jack would look at her in his backstory. And he remarks about how he never thought he'd see this color again. But as he's sort of daydreaming, Heracles speaks up and interrupts him, and he says, Jack the Ripper, I will save you from your suffering. So, at this point, we sort of reaffirm Heracles' unbreakable will, that he is going to fight for what's right no matter what. It was also at this point that I realized that no matter how this fight ends, I'm going to be very fucking sad. Which was right. I was right. But yeah, so at this point, we know that either Jack is going to win and we're going to be sad about Heracles dying, or Heracles is going to win and we're going to be sad because now the humans will be at a big disadvantage again. But with that, we go into something that I did not expect. Heracles is holding his club up in the air, and he brings it down, and he throws it. Seems to surprise Jack and Heimdall, and as the club is spinning up into the air, it starts to sort of morph and spin. It's like it's liquefying. And then this vortex opens up in the sky, and as it is spinning around, you see like these ghostly faces in it, and Heracles is holding his remaining hand up in the air, and he says, "Come forth, hound of Hades." And with that, the vortex starts like leaking down towards him. The whole city is getting blown around in the wind. And Ares is looking at this and he's like, no, wait, that can't be. And we see, coming out of the portal, these 3 hidden faces. And then these 2 giant canine paws with massive claws. God, the rhyming. I hate myself for saying that. It's the Herculean Exodus again. We haven't seen it in 3 chapters. But yeah, Cerberus is here, and he looks pretty cool. I haven't seen him with like 5 or 6 eyes on each head before. It's a pretty neat design. I admit it looks a little cartoonish, but I like the design the illustrator was going for. But 2 of the dog heads bite Heracles' arm, which was weird. I'm like, what the fuck? Why would you call Cerberus so that he could, like, eat you or whatever? But then the middle head goes to chomp down on Heracles' head, and Heracles is just staring forward, looking stalwart as ever. And then we get to the words, 12th labor, the final labor. And with that, we get the reveal of Heracles' final form, the 12th labor, Cerberus. So, I, for some reason, it completely fucking escaped my mind to think that Heracles would have a final form like all the other gods have to one extent or another. Because I'm an idiot, I don't know. But I also kind of didn't expect it based on the sort of powers that we saw from the Herculean Exodus so far. But to be fair, we only saw like 2.5. So, this form looks fucking awesome. It's kind of gross. It's sort of grotesque. He has like these bones protruding out of him and sticking into his flesh, and his right arm has these big holes in it from where Cerberus chopped down on him. It's kind of gross, but also really fucking awesome. He's got like a spike collar on now. I would make a joke, but it'd be really cringy. Sort of how he went from being this super nice guy, like Heracles is the nice guy, really, and now he went to being super fucking edgy looking. This is like something a 12-year-old would think of. However, since this is a fantastic illustrator, it looks fucking awesome. His hair's way longer now, and he's got these chains flowing behind him. It's tremendous. But anyway, everyone is shocked by this, just as shocked as I was, because I guess no one else expected this from him either. But Zeus takes a look at this, and he sort of pulls on his beard, and he says, "Oh yeah, looks like there's a battle against time from now on out. The 12th labor is super strong. It has big capacity for destruction, but because of that, the proportional toll is also huge. So now it's a matter of Heracles either beating Jack or dying first, because the labor can't be stopped. It will continue to spread. Unlike all the other ones, which used up a certain amount as he used the labor, this one will continue going on, of course, because it's a transformation ability. So it's not really clear if he's going to die definitely by using this, or like it won't stop until he turns it off. I think that may be what it is, because there seemed to be hope that it seems to be implied that if Heracles manages to kill Jack now that he's in this form, that he would survive. So I guess the labor will stop when he exits the form, I guess. But now that Heracles has entered his final form, Jack realizes that this is his final labor, and that he needs to think of a new plan, because all of his plans so far have just been leading up to him using Big Ben's face to cut off his arm. So now he needs to think of something new. However, it would need to be a plan to befit a gentleman, and he starts JoJo posing on him, which is great. So Heracles charges at him. You see that his feet have sort of transformed. They've got like long black claws, and he's got a bunch of fur. But he lunges at Jack, and Jack manages to dodge. But the force of Heracles' punches are tearing apart the buildings around them. And as all of this destruction is being caused, Jack is grabbing the debris, turning it into Voland, and throwing it at Heracles. But Heracles is so strong now in this form that he's just able to smash the Volans with his fists, or his fist, because he only has one now, without any real issue. It's kind of like he doesn't need to exert any real effort to do it. But Jack is about to use this pub sign, and Heracles smashes right through it. And Heracles uses this opportunity to try and do a big punch called the Great Hero Blow, which I fucking hate the name of. It sounds super lame, but it's just a big, like, haymaker or whatever. His fist looks really big. I don't think he actually increased the size. I think it's just, like, figurative. Jack just flips over it, of course, because this whole thing so far, other than trickery, has been dexterity. But Heracles smashes his fist down into the ground, and he tries to spin around to hit Jack, and he misses because he forgot this fucking arm got cut off, which is a nice touch. I think it's funny, and adds a little bit of realism that, of course, Heracles is not used to his left arm not being there. So, anyway, the conflict continues, and Jack kicks a manhole cover. He, like, stomps on it to flip it up into the air, which is really impressive, because those things are not light at all. It's, like, solid metal. It's well over 100 pounds. But Jack uses this as a shield to try and block Heracles' punch. But Heracles just starts to push right through it. And Jack seems to show an incredible amount of resistance to this, but eventually Heracles just punches right through it and hits him in the face. This is another one of those small, teeny-tiny problems I have with this fight, but they kind of add up a little bit. So, Heracles' punches were just shown to be able to tear apart buildings just from the force of him moving his fist without even touching them. So the fact that Jack was able to, even for a moment, push back his fist with the manhole cover, and then not have his fucking head blown off with his fist, even if the impact was reduced, is kind of plot armory. But whatever. Jack gets back up and decides to grappling hook up onto this building that has a cross on top of it. And as he's doing that, Heracles jumps right back up after him. And when this happens, Jack looks down and seems to notice something. And he falls down. It looks like he was supposed to hit Jack there, but I guess he just hit, like, the air or something. I don't know. If he did hit him, he should have been liquefied. But whatever. Jack realizes he's falling down onto a spiked fence, which he is impaled upon. This is another one of those serious hits that Jack has taken. He hasn't really taken any real damage. I guess him getting punched in the face, that was the first real direct hit, quote-unquote, that he took, because even then it was still kind of blocked by the manhole cover. But this is the first time that Jack has been seriously wounded in the fight, and that's, like, actually a very serious injury. It's gone straight through his side. But he takes one knife out of his pouch. I assume it's the last one, because he never fucking uses them again. Which, right, that was another little plot hole. How the fuck did Jack fit all of that shit in his bags? Like, even if they're, let's be generous here, ridiculously light knives and butterfly knife parts and umbrella parts, how the fuck did he walk around with all of that stuff in his bags? And they weren't even, like, sticking out or whatever. So, I guess they could actually be pouches that produce items infinitely, but they're not divine weapons? Or, it's a plot hole. I don't know. Maybe the space inside the bags don't make sense, and Jack just so happened to run out of shit by the time he was getting chased up Big Ben. Who knows? But Jack pulls the fence post out of his stomach, stands up, and Heracles is like, yeah, there's nowhere for you to run in this town. And Jack's like, yeah, you're right. However, and he takes his coat off, which I was like, oh shit. And he turns the coat into volant, and then he swings it around, and he slices up the base of the building they were standing to. At this point, Heracles has a, oh shit moment, because he realizes as Jack was pulling himself up the building with his grappling hook, he fucking touched the building. Which means that this giant fucking building is now also a volant, which is now falling down towards Heracles. Jack runs right at him, and Heracles, not knowing if he has any other weapons or anything, uses his arm to block. Jack jumps onto Heracles' arm and bounces off of it, goes through one of the windows in the building to escape. And this is Jack's first named move, Rondo of Blessing, which is another dumb, sounds kind of grammatically incorrect name. I know there was a scan that called it Rondo's Blessing, or I think the original name was Rondo's Blessing, which sounds much better. But you get a 2-page spread of this gigantic building falling down on top of Heracles, who tries to hold it up, but it crashes down on top of him. Now, in the rubble of this, Jack is sort of standing around smugly, and everyone's remarking about how fucking ridiculous it is that Jack turned a building into a divine weapon and dropped it on a god, which is ridiculous. This is the sort of ridiculous stuff that I love from this series, and you can of course expect from it. I come to expect this sort of ridiculous shit nowadays from them, but Arthur Conan Doyle is thinking about his plan and how devilish it is. But since a gigantic god weapon fell on Heracles, a bunch of people are assuming that he's died, and Castor and Ares are both calling for Heracles to get back up, and they're using his different names. Castor is calling him Alcides, and Ares is calling him Heracles. And I think it's interesting to show that both this god and this human care so much about Heracles. I hope this is expanded on in the future. I hope so. There are some interesting ideas that I think the author could go with after this fight, and I hope they do. But anyways, Heracles is fine, somehow. I guess it's because he's Heracles. He seems to be almost immune to bludgeoning damage, I guess, but very weak to piercing damage and slashing damage. But whatever, he's fine and seems to be basically unharmed. So all the gods are cheering. Heracles is referred to as their hero, and Ares is super relieved that Heracles is fine. He remarks about how he's like the best of the gods. He's the pride of the gods. But now that he's back up, Jack and Heracles are sort of staring at each other. They're both bleeding. Jack from the very big hole in his stomach from the fence post, and Heracles from his arm. Jack sort of muses, "Oh, welcome back. Did you like the gift that I got you?" And Heracles just sort of completely ignores him and says, "No matter what you do, the justice in my heart will never waver." More just reaffirming that Heracles' will can't be broken, but Jack looks at him with his eye, and Heracles looks very unamused, and we see again that Heracles is still completely colored in true love, as Jack saw he was at the end of the last chapter. But unlike last time, where Jack was sort of in awe at this, he starts laughing, which surprises Heracles, and he's like, "What's so funny?" And Jack keeps laughing, and he's like, "Oh, shit, that hurt," because he has a hole in his stomach now. So I just think that's a funny detail. But he says that thanks to Heracles, he realized that the color he saw in his mother was fake, and that he didn't realize that true love would be as beautiful as what he's seeing now. And then he starts muttering, and he's covering his face, and he says, "Oh, I want to dye you in my favorite color." And he uses the blood from his own stomach to paint a smile on his face, and it's just this insane fucking panel of Jack, looking like a complete fucking psycho. Yes, he does the Joker face. It's tremendous. It's wonderful. This is also super disturbing, this face, but it's great. In response to this, instead of getting freaked out or whatever, Heracles just smiles and he says, "Just try it. Just try and change my color." And now we enter the final stage of the fight. Before the fighting continues, we get this flashback from the perspective of Anne, Jack's prostitute buddy, who was really the only person in the world that sort of actually even gave the slightest shit about him as a person. But she says how Jack wasn't loved by anybody, and he wasn't taught to love. He was just a pitiful little kid. And she thought that if anyone could love Jack, that maybe the gods could love him. And with that, we get to this wonderful picture of Heracles with the light shining down on him, and he says, "Come on, just try and change my color." So Jack takes his hand off of his wound with all the blood on it, and he says, "Oh, of course. Together let us bring forth the greatest finale." And now, as the narrator himself is acknowledging that we're getting to the end of the fight. Heracles starts walking towards Jack, and Jack does the same. However, he picks up a broken door and a piece of the door frame to use as a sword and shield, which is awesome. I love his Voland. The possibilities that it created in terms of his weaponry was tremendous. So we got to see a lot of creative stuff with it. But the two of them enter a close quarters showdown where they're just swinging at each other. Heracles blocking all of Jack's swings and then striking at his shield. But eventually, Heracles breaks Jack's shield and then punches through the doorframe and hits him in the gut, right in the wound on his stomach, which sends him back flying all the way down the street. Which again, probably should have done way more damage considering the strength feat that the 12th labor was shown to have earlier, but whatever. Jack gets back up, and we see that the tattoo from the Herculean Exodus is spreading further onto his body. It's got like these little veins coming off of it. And Ares freaks out and says that you have to do it now. You have to kill him now, Heracles. There is no more time left. You have to finish this immediately. But Jack keeps dodging all of Heracles' strikes, which pisses off Ares, who says that he's scurrying around like a rat. But Loki's like, no. Jack's lost a lot of blood. He is short on time, too. He doesn't have a lot of time to fuck around. So why would you get into a melee fight with him? What are you trying to do? So as Jack is dodging all of Heracles' punches, he's thinking, and he's like, no, that's not it. No, wait a second. The angle, the timing, perfect, now. And you see he slides it out of his sleeve, the fence post that had stabbed him through the gut. He's turned it into Voland, and now that he's within Heracles' blind spot, he tries to stab him. But unfortunately, he only stabs him through the cheek, right up against his eye. He just barely missed his eye. It's very gross. I had never considered getting stabbed through the cheek before until I saw this, and it made me kind of squeamish, but Heracles just backhands him, which somehow doesn't blow his fucking head off, but whatever. An interesting thing to note is that the blood that he had smeared on that side of his face is gone now, which is something important that we'll get into later. But Ares is excited. Loki is like, oh yeah, I guess that was his plan to try and hide the fence post, but it fucking failed hilariously. And now that Jack appears to have been knocked out, like his eyes are rolling up into his head, the humans are like, well, shit. Guess he was just a serial killer after all. But then Anne shows up and she's like, no, you guys suck. Why don't you guys go fucking fight the gods if you have that kind of stuff to say about him? He's all alone. And he's still fighting. But Jack starts singing London Bridge is Falling Down again. As he had been earlier when he had his flashback. And he's getting up. He doesn't have his big overcoat on anymore. He uses the fence post as a cane to help support him getting up. And we get this wonderful, wonderful panel of Jack with his arms out and the moonlight coming down on him. It's all very beautiful. The whole second half of this chapter, actually, or more in like the last third of it, is just beautifully drawn. It's probably the best art in the series so far. But Jack keeps singing, and as he's walking around, he's dragging the fence post with him. And they realize that Jack has lost consciousness, or I think that may be inaccurate, because as he continues walking forward, we see that Jack is daydreaming. So he's not unconscious, but he's just not there. He's sort of zoned out. And he's having this daydream about him running around London as a kid, and how everyone's so nice to him. You have that asshole chef offering him like a turkey dinner or whatever, and both of his parents are together and they're happy, and they seem to be rich, and Jack is just happy. And then we flash back to the real world, and Jack is just sort of looking down at the ground. It's all very tragic. The tragedy of Jack the Ripper is really just, it's something. It definitely makes him a much more interesting character than just having him be some crazy murderer that liked killing people or whatever. You definitely feel really bad for Jack, which is good, because if you didn't, you wouldn't be rooting for him at all. That's probably the best part of round 4, is that you could have really rooted for either side in the fight. You have Heracles, who wanted to save humanity, and Jack, who is actually fighting on the side of humanity, even though he's evil, and he has this terrible history that led to him being the monster he is now. But Jack looks up at Heracles, because he's standing right in front of him now, and they enter their final clash. Jack gets ready to stab Heracles, and Heracles gets his fist up in the air, and Jack misses. He just totally whiffs it, and he just gets kind of bonked on the head. Like, it looks like he just kind of got, like, nudged a bit with one of Heracles' knuckles. But he falls, and he drops the fence post. And as he's falling down, Heracles says, "You've done well. You don't need to suffer anymore. Rest." And he takes his hand up in the air to do this chop. And as Jack is falling down, you see the blood coming off of his gloves. And then he takes a step to stop his fall, and he has his hands back up in the air behind him, and then he oh shit, what's the word I'm looking for? He, like, lunges forward with his hands and the blood coating them. And then we see this splash of blood, all the reactions from the audience, and then we see that Jack's hands have gone straight through Heracles' chest. Jack says, "Dear God, that's the name of this technique I'm going to dedicate to you." Ares questions how could Jack's bare hands, even though they're not his bare hands, how could they pierce divine flesh? And Heracles realizes he coated his hands in blood and turned them into Volan to use as a weapon. Which I don't know how I feel about. I don't know how I feel about them being able to turn organic matter into Volan. I would have kind of just preferred if it was just his gloves themselves, since his gloves are the Volan, like the real Volan. But whatever. Since he's been beat pretty much, Heracles is like, "Hey, did you manage to change my color?" And Jack looks up and he says, "No, it is my loss." And we see this panel of Heracles sort of smiling, with the color shining through him, the quote-unquote color, but he's glowing, he's shining like an angel. And Heracles says, "Yeah, I will never change." And then we see this panel where the entire background is blacked out, and you have Heracles' hand still in, like, the sort of chop, and Jack's face is like, "Oh shit." And it looks like Heracles is going to do one final attack to kill Jack, now that he has nowhere to go. And he says, "Never forget, I will always love humans." And he gives Jack a hug. Gives him a little embrace, which is wonderful. And Jack smiles and says, "Oh God, you're so stubborn." Heracles smiles, and he starts to break apart. And one of the gods, it's not clear which one, I think it may be Loki, he says, in the end, even if he lost the strength to strike, he still possessed the strength to embrace, huh? Which I don't think is true. What I think happened was Heracles realizes that he's going to die. He's going to die no matter what now. Like, he's been fatally injured. So if he kills Jack, humanity loses the round, and then Heracles is no longer able to convince the gods to spare humanity. So rather, whatever, just die and give humanity the win, so that even without me, they still have their chance of survival. But Heracles is starting to fade away, and he's like, "Oh yeah, that was a really good fight. Sorry for yelling at you, Brunhild. I leave the rest to you. Though they may be foolish, I still hold them dear. Please save them." And with that, Heracles' body breaks apart into dust. We get a page showing everyone's reactions, pretty much everyone crying, with this picture of Heracles smiling in front of them. We get this image of Jack's blood-soaked glove sort of open as the last few sort of particles of dust are fading away. And then he closes his hand and says, "I wonder what color must I be right now?" And with that, the fight concludes. Heracles versus Jack the Ripper. Match length 26 minutes, 57 seconds. Deciding move, Dear God. Victor, Jack the Ripper. Preserving love which encompasses humanity. So that was a tremendous fight, and that's the conclusion of the fight. Okay, since this is starting to get kind of long, instead of just going over the entirety of chapter 30, I'm just going to sum up the things that happened. So, Flock pops back up. She reverts to her original form from the gloves and asks Jack how did it feel to kill a god. And he's like, I don't know. I don't know what this emotion is. And Hawk sort of thinks for a second. She's like, wow, you can't even look sad when you're feeling sad. You're a pretty pathetic guy. And Jack's like, am I sad? Is this sadness? But Hawk flies off, and as Jack is walking back to leave the arena, picks up his hat. He's having all of these memories of the fight and the things Heracles was saying to him, saying how he'll save him from his suffering and how he'll always love humans. And as Jack puts his hat back on, he says, if I had one wish, I wish I could see you again. And as he's leaving the arena, he gets hit by a rock on the head. And then all of the children from the god side start throwing trash at him and saying how they wish he died instead and how they want Heracles back. They want their hero back. And Castor is going to throw something at Jack, and then he remembers when Alcides first became a god, and he says, he told Zeus, swear you'll never harm humans again. And then he breaks down. But as Jack is leaving the arena, Arthur Conan Doyle says, so Jack the Ripper's malice was able to consume a god. I knew it. He's not human, he's a monster. And Shakespeare says, no. No. I say that man is a human too. Which I feel like was the entire purpose of Shakespeare being there in the first place. I think they just put him in there so he could say that Shakespearean line, because he doesn't really do anything. He doesn't really commentate on anything for the entirety of the fight, other than showing up to explain that Jack did a Shakespeare line, and then some comment about how Jack was super evil or whatever. But, Zeus is pissed. He destroys their section of the arena because now the humans are tied with the gods, and he says, we can't, under any circumstances, let them get a lead. Oh, and, Loki realizes that Jack figured out when he was in the air, trying to grapple up that building, what he would need to do. So the entire events of him getting stabbed and then covering his gloves in blood and trying to use the fence post and then using Dear God was all part of his plan. He realized he would have to do that. He realized he would have to wager his own life to beat Heracles. And Hermes says, yeah, but, like, if I was in that situation, I would have never made as risky a bet as that. And Loki's like, yeah, that guy was a real asshole. But going back to the Valkyries, Gare is crying, and she's like, oh, Brunhild, are you happy now that murderer killed Heracles? And Brunhild says, we're Valkyries, we are the choosers of the slain. Our only job is to preserve humanity. Nothing else matters. And as she's saying this, she's gripping her fist, and you see that her nails are digging into her hand, causing her to bleed. And she walks off. And she enters this chamber. And we see that she has actually made these sort of shrines to the other human fighters that died. There's a shrine to Lubu and Adam. and she makes another shrine to Heracles, and she says, I'm sure Heracles wouldn't mind if I shrined him along with humanity. And then she starts crying, like she's fucking bawling her eyes out. And she says, Brother Heracles, soon I will join you in that place. That's the last relevant thing. There's this thing after this. They show Akita Sochi, but he doesn't fight next. It's just to show that this series and the author's other series, Requiem of the Shogun, are in the same universe, but whatever, that's not really relevant to this video. But now that we've gotten through all of that, that's sort of the real conclusion to the story of the fourth round. So I would say, as my sort of general final thoughts overview of the fight, that the message of round 4 was sort of that malice and evil is a intrinsic part of humanity. It's not something that we can just get rid of, because what would have happened if Heracles beat Jack and Jack was erased from existence? It would show that, oh yeah, human malice can just be erased. Well, shit, it can. Which is a good, accurate message. I'm glad that the author decided to do that. But then, the message sort of changes halfway through the fight with the realization that Heracles is enveloped with true love for humanity. And the message sort of becomes about how love and compassion is essential to the preservation of humanity, which it is. How evil can be overcome through compassion. By showing love to your fellow human, you can overcome evil, which is why we have the final message at the end of chapter 29, preserving love, which encompasses humanity. But yeah, that was a great fight. I was quite sad when I originally got to the end of this. I won't lie, I cried. I cried a little bit. But with that, now, the sides are tied 2-2. Gods have 2 wins, and humanity has 2 wins. Which means that the round coming after this is going to be very important to decide who has the lead now, who has the advantage. But yeah, the end of this fight sort of feels like the end of a season, especially with the Akita Sochi thing. That sort of felt like an after credits scene you'd see at like the end of the season of an anime, which is why I think when this series, hopefully when it's eventually animated, that these first 4 fights will be the first season. Which I think would work. You could probably condense these into like 13 episodes. You got like 2 or 3 chapters into an episode. But yeah, I guess that's all I have left to say. These aren't scripted, of course, so if I forget something, oh well. Now that I've finished doing videos for all of the completed fights, and since I've kind of gone over chapter 30, I'll be doing a review for chapter 31, since that's the start of the next fight. And after that, I really won't have any more Record of Ragnarok stuff to do until the next chapter comes out. So I have some stuff in mind for what to do in between then. I may do like an update or whatever, or I'll just start releasing it when I get it done. But yeah, thanks for sticking around if you enjoyed this video, and if you've watched all of the videos I've done so far. If you haven't, please consider going back and watching through all of them. If you liked this video, this is basically just what I did for all the other ones. If you're looking forward to my future videos on Record of Ragnarok, please consider liking and subscribing so that you don't miss them. And I'll see you around.